All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're putting on our detective hats to solve a kind of digital mystery. See, there's this black hole that's swallowing up our website data. And you know what? It's getting bigger. A massive part of the story, who's visiting our sites and why they're there, is just disappearing. So we're going to figure out where it's all going and, more importantly, why this data black hole is about to get a whole lot deeper.
So let's start with a question that really cuts to the chase. Just imagine for a second that you run a website. Now, what if you were totally in the dark about what almost half of your visitors from Google were actually looking for? It sounds a bit like a bad dream, right? Well, for a lot of people, it's already a reality.
And here's the number that proves it. A whopping 46.77%. That is a staggering amount of your search traffic data from Google that is for all intents and purposes invisible. That means nearly 1 out of every 2 visitors who lands on your site is a complete ghost. We're not talking about a small rounding error here. This is a gigantic blind spot.
So what's behind the curtain? What's hiding all this data from us? Well, the culprit actually has a name: anonymized queries. Let's pull off the mask and see what's really going on here.
So here's the official story from Google. They say they hide search queries that aren't used by more than, and I quote, a few dozen users over a couple of months. And they do this to protect user privacy. Now, on the surface, that sounds, well, it sounds pretty reasonable, doesn't it? I mean, you wouldn't want your super specific, one-of-a-kind search showing up in somebody's analytics report. But is that really the whole picture?
Well, here's the reality check. When a very similar privacy method was talked about, it was pointed out that this kind of definition ends up hiding something like 99% of all long-tail queries. You know, those longer, super specific searches that we all do. All of a sudden, that few dozen users threshold doesn't sound so small, does it? It means we're pretty much missing out on the entire long tail of search.
Okay, so we've got our culprit, and we've got a motive: user privacy. So now it's time to follow the data trail and see just how deep this rabbit hole really goes.
You know, this isn't some brand new thing that just popped up. If you look at the timeline, this number has been hanging out around that 45 to 46% mark for years. Yeah, it dipped a little bit, but now it's ticked right back up again. This tells us it's a huge, persistent issue, not just some temporary glitch in the system.
But here's the thing about that 46.77% number. It's just an average. And like any average, it can be really misleading. It hides what's actually happening on the ground. Because for a lot of websites, the situation is way, way worse.
So yeah, the average data loss is just under 47%. But the reality for most individual sites is that they're losing somewhere between 45 and a massive 80% of their query data. Just let that sink in for a second. For many sites, that's like trying to navigate a ship in the dark with no compass.
And this is where the plot really thickens. It turns out that how much traffic your site gets plays this really fascinating and honestly kind of counterintuitive role in how much data you're losing.
Check this out. It's not what you'd expect. The sites that are right in the middle with average traffic, they actually see the most data. It's the little guys, the low traffic sites, and the absolute giants, the high traffic sites that get hit the hardest. And this probably happens because the small sites get tons of very niche, unique, long-tail searches, while the huge sites get tons of branded or proprietary searches. And both of those types are way more likely to get tossed into that anonymized bucket.
So, just when you think you've got this case all figured out, along comes a massive plot twist. And believe me, it is a big one. There's a new force on the horizon that is about to change everything we've just talked about: artificial intelligence.
It really all boils down to one simple fact. AI is fundamentally changing our behavior. We're not just plugging a few keywords into a search box anymore. We're being encouraged to ask questions and find information in totally new ways.
Think about it. We're basically having conversations with search engines now. We're using full sentences, asking really complex questions, and as a result, our search queries are getting way longer and way more detailed. In fact, Google even got rid of its old 32-word limit on searches, a pretty clear signal that they expect this trend to go into overdrive.
And what happens when a search gets longer and more conversational? Well, it gets more unique, right? The very specific way you might phrase a 15-word question is almost guaranteed to be different from how someone else would ask it. It's not like a simple 3-word search that thousands of people might type in.
And now, let's bring this all full circle. Remember our culprit from the beginning? What happens to queries that are unique, that aren't searched by more than a few dozen people? That's right, they get anonymized. They disappear from our reports. So when you put all these pieces together, you get one inescapable conclusion. As AI continues to train us to use longer, more conversational, more unique searches, the percentage of queries that get anonymized is going to absolutely explode.
That 47% we started with, think of that as the floor. It's about to get so much worse.
So after following all the evidence and uncovering the plot twist, what's the final verdict in our case? What does all of this actually mean for you? For anyone who runs a website, who creates content, or who just relies on search to connect with people?
Okay, let's just break down the takeaways. First off, you're flying increasingly blind. Your view of how people are actually finding you is getting foggier by the day, and that makes understanding your audience's intent, what they really want, much harder. It means that relying just on the data Google gives you is like trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. And to top it all off, the new age of AI search is about to pour gasoline on this whole fire, making this data loss happen even faster.
And all of this really leads to one final, massive question for the future. As AI completely rewires how we search for information, in a world where more and more of our data is hidden away for privacy, will we ever be able to truly know our audience again?